early days of modern judo. In this kataguruma, the body of the opponent is raised up high, and the throw is then made by bending backwards. The direction of the throws may differ, but these are all considered kataguruma, and the effect of the throw is recognized. Here you enter low on one knee, raise your opponent up and throw him down. Kataguruma with different forms include this as well. As in morotegari, you raise your opponent up holding both his legs, then stretching backwards, throw him down. This form is hardly... This is Jigoro Kano, the founder of the Kodokan Judo. Professor Jigoro Kano learned the traditional Japanese martial art jujutsu, and he transformed it into something new, with an objective and practicing methods appropriate to the new era. In 1882, he named it Kodokan Judo. Judo, which is practiced around the world, is in fact Kodokan Judo. Judo, which Professor Kano promoted with all his might for some 50 years, later became widespread and eagerly pursued in over 150 nations of the world, eventually achieving recognition as an Olympic event. Techniques of judo can be divided into three kinds: nagewaza, katamewaza, and atemiwaza. And there are two ways of practice: dandori and kata. Nagewaza can be divided into tachiwaza and stemiwaza. For each technique, let us now show you the basics and applications, as well as differences between techniques which look alike. Seoi nage. There are two types of seoi nage: morote seoi nage and ippon seoi nage. The hands are used differently when lifting your opponent. This is morote seoi nage. Put your right elbow underneath the side of your opponent's body as you lift him. You grasp one side of your opponent's collar and sleeve. The technique used in throwing him is an application of morote seoi nage. This is ippon seoi nage. You hold and control one of the arms of your opponent as you lift and throw him. Seoi nage with your arm turned. In ippon seoi nage, you sometimes extend one of your legs wide to the outside of your opponent's right leg. Morote seoi nage executed with a leg extended wide to the outside. This technique is an application of seoi nage and is not tai otoshi. Ippon seoi nage. You throw your opponent by turning him over on top of you. This is Ippon seoi nage, executed by grasping your opponent's left arm. The key is to control your opponent's left arm by winding it in under the side of your body. Now let's look at various seoi nage from different contests. Yusuke Yamamoto, the 1987 world champion in the 65 kilogram class. Seoi nage executed by Sumio Endo, a former world champion in the heavyweight class. It's his favorite technique. A beautiful Ippon seoi nage executed by Masao Takahashi at a world championships. At the Kano Cup International Tournament, Toshiko Koga shows off his favorite technique, Ippon seoi. Seoi otoshi. Seoi otoshi is a throwing technique where you take your opponent on your back and pull him straight down. As you throw, you can do so either with one knee or both knees on the floor. Seoi otoshi, moving from an Ippon seoi nage position. In seoi nage, you throw your opponent by lifting him over, but in seoi otoshi, you throw him by pulling him down over you. Seoi otoshi on both knees. Whether it's seoi nage or seoi otoshi is decided by whether your opponent was lifted or pulled over. This is seoi nage with both knees on the floor. We judge so because after going down on both knees, the throw was made by raising the hip and hoisting the opponent's frame. Seoi otoshi by Yoshiyuki Matsuoka, the 65 kilogram class champion at the Los Angeles Olympics. Tai otoshi. There are various ways of executing tai otoshi depending on the situation. This is tai otoshi executed by drawing the opponent out. This is a tailing tai otoshi, executed the moment the opponent moves his leg back. In this tai otoshi, the opponent has been drawn out sideways. There are cases where tai otoshi is executed by grabbing one side of the collar. Double motion tai otoshi. It was executed first of all by lightly kicking the inside of the opponent's foot to make him lose balance. In another instance, you might cross your opponent's arms when executing the throw. By twisting your opponent's arms, his body goes off balance and his resistance is stopped. Hiromitsu Takano, the winner of the Kano Cup, here shows off a spirited taiotoshi. At the World Judo Championships in Seoul, Hitoshi Sugai catches Ha Hong-ju of Korea just as they establish their grip, a brilliant taiotoshi. Kataguruma. Kataguruma is a technique in which you haul your opponent up above you as you throw. As you can see, the throw is generally made by throwing your opponent down toward the tip of your foot. In Kataguruma, the throw can be made in any number of directions after you raise your opponent up. In this case, the opponent is thrown directly in front. It appears that this kind of throw was often used in the early days of modern judo. In this kataguruma, the body of the opponent is raised up high, and the throw is then made by bending backwards. The direction of the throws may differ, but these are all considered kataguruma, and the effect of the throw is recognized. Here you enter low on one knee, raise your opponent up and throw him down. Kataguruma with different forms include this as well. As in morotegari, you raise your opponent up holding both his legs, then stretching backwards, throw him down. This form is hardly ever seen nowadays, but was apparently one of the techniques in the older schools of jujutsu. Ukiotoshi. The tori, or active partner, pulls the uke, or passive partner, forward, goes down on one knee, and pulls him down in front. The aim of practicing kata, or form, is to make students realize the principle behind the technique. In ukiotoshi, you sometimes step in the moment your opponent steps forward with his left foot, then execute your throw by pulling him off balance to one side of you. When your right hand is grasping the middle of the sleeve like this, you can force him to go off balance by pushing up on his elbow. Have another look. Dodging your opponent's osotogari by pulling back your leg, turn aside and then throw. This is also ukiotoshi. Sumiotoshi. Sumiotoshi is a throwing technique in which you shake your opponent off balance into the rear corner, then throw him by thrusting him down. Using your right hand, you pull up your opponent by grasping his left collar. You make your opponent lose balance by causing him to raise his left foot and shift his weight to his right heel. In another instance, you shift your grip from his left collar to the middle of his sleeve, You then push his elbow up to make him lose balance. Sumiotoshi and ukiotoshi make up a pair. Let's now look at the difference between sumiotoshi and ukiotoshi. In sumiotoshi, you push and throw your opponent down to the rear. In ukiotoshi, you pull and throw your opponent down to the front. The direction of off-balancing and throwing your opponent differs. Sumiotoshi was one of the favorite techniques of Kyuzo Mifune, the 10th Dan. Pay close attention to the principle of the technique, where you force your opponent's left foot to come forward and throw him down in a backward direction. Sukui Nage. Originally, in Sukui Nage, you first pushed your opponent back to make him lose balance, then lifted him up and threw him in a backward direction. This technique is not at all seen in recent tournaments. In a tournament, the technique of placing a hand underneath your opponent's thigh and lifting him up is often used. When your opponent tries a harai goshi, you should pull your foot back to open yourself up for an attack, then put your hand in from behind your opponent to lift him up and throw him down. Similarly, when your opponent comes at you with an o sotogari, then you should again put your hand in from behind and throw. Again, when he attempts an uchimata, you can evade his motion, then putting your hand in from behind, transform it into a sukui nage. On occasion, you may throw using your hips as you lift your opponent. Another way is to lift your opponent as he tries a hanegoshi, then throw by brushing aside his pivot leg. This time, the opponent is lifted by putting a hand in from the front. When your opponent tries o sotogari, pull your foot back, then as you do so, put your hand in from the front and lift him up. The final of the 1976 All Japan Championships. Sumio Endo wins with a sukui nage. At the Kobe Universiade competition 65-kilogram finals, Yun of Korea performs a sukui nage. Obi Otoshi. Obi Otoshi can be considered a kind of sukui nage. It is one of the techniques of Jiu-Jitsu, the traditional martial art. Grasp the front part of your opponent's belt. Push him directly back to cause him to lose balance, lift him from the side, and throw him down towards the rear. The principle of Obi Otoshi is very much like that of sukui nage. Obi Otoshi is hardly ever used in modern tournaments, but is one of the techniques used in free exercises of Kodokan Judo. Morote Gari. Morotegari is often used in a competition. There are different ways of starting morotegari. In this case, you catch your opponent the moment you come to grapple with him. This is morotegari, where you first pull your opponent forward. In this case, seoi-nage turns into a morotegari. When you attempt seoi-nage, your opponent will react by bending backwards. Morotegari is then performed without a pause. In following on from a seoi-nage, you sometimes make one complete turn, as you can see here. This also is an application of morotegari. Here you make your opponent fall by grasping one of his feet using both hands. Morotegari performed by Kim Jae-yup of Korea, the 1987 world champion in the 60-kilogram class. Kuchiki-daoshi. Kuchiki-daoshi is a technique in which you take your opponent's leg and push him down backwards. It's often used in a tournament. You push your opponent down by taking hold of his leg, but sometimes it's executed from the inside as well as from the outside. In Kuchiki-daoshi, you may simply grasp the other's leg, or you may change it into either from your own or your opponent's technique. Here you turn from seoi-nage and grasp your opponent's leg from inside. This is a follow-on technique starting from kataguruma. A kataguruma is attempted, but as your opponent defends himself by shifting his weight backwards, the throw is made by grasping his leg from inside. This time we start with the opponent's osotogari. When the opponent attacks with osotogari, defend yourself by opening up, turning sideways. As you do so, catch him from inside his legs to make him fall. Here you down your opponent by catching his leg from outside. When you perform kouchigari, your opponent counters by raising the foot that's been swept from the side. Grasp his leg from outside at that moment to make him fall. This time, continuing from ouchigari. The moment your opponent raises his foot to counter the move, you catch his leg from outside to drop him. Look closely at the movement of the right hand. This is not seoi-nage, but kuchiki-daoshi. A continuous movement is made from a seoi-nage, and your opponent is made to fall with the right hand on the outside of his leg. Turning your opponent's hizaguruma into this technique. Catching the foot of your opponent as he attempts hizaguruma, push him down with your left hand to make him fall. Kuchiki-daoshi, performed by Nojsori Mosh of Hungary at the World Championships. gaeshi. Kibis gaeshi is a technique in which you fell your opponent by taking hold of his heel. There are two ways of performing kibis gaeshi. Either by grasping the inside of your opponent's heel, or by grasping the outside. First make seoi nage, then turn once to face your opponent to follow on to kibis gaeshi. First, grasping your opponent's heel from outside. Catch your opponent's heel from outside as he tries to withdraw, then cut him down by pushing with your left hand. In the following case, too, you grasp the heel from outside. From kochigari, you make your opponent fall by taking the heel of the raised foot from outside. Changing your opponent's hizaguruma into this technique. When your opponent attacks with a hizaguruma, take his heel from outside to cut him down. Let's compare techniques. In kuchiki daoshi, you push your opponent down by putting your hand on his leg. In kibis gaeshi, you grasp your opponent's heel and cut him right down on the spot. Kochigaeshi. In kochigaeshi, you dodge your opponent's kochigari, then drop him by twisting to either right or left. When your opponent attacks with a kochigari, you evade by raising the foot that's been struck, then make a throw by twisting him to the left. This time, twisting to the right. Look closely at how you evade the attack and how you make the twist. This is deashi harai, brushing off the starting move. When the kochigari of your opponent is brushed off like this, it'll be called deashi harai. This is hizaguruma. The opponent's kochigari changes into a hizaguruma. Kochigaeshi is classified as a hand technique, not a foot technique. Uchimata sukashi. When your opponent attacks with uchimata, you move your right foot back, turn and twist. The opponent, losing his target, will only hit empty air and fall, drawing a large arc as he does so. Occasionally, you may raise one of your feet up high to dodge the attack. This also is an application of uchimata sukashi. Uchimata sukashi, performed by Katsuhiko Kashiwazaki, the 1981 world champion. Another uchimata sukashi, performed by Masao Takahashi at the World Championships in Paris. Olympic champion Shinji Hosokawa performs Uchimata Sukashi at the Pacific Rim Judo Championships. Yama Arashi. For several years after 1886, there was a fierce rivalry between the old-style jiu-jitsu and Jigoro Kano's Kodokan Judo. People of the time went wild with enthusiasm at the Tokyo Police Martial Arts Tournament, which was to decide whether to opt for jiu-jitsu or for judo, when the diminutive Sanshiro Sugata felled his giant of an opponent with Yama Arashi. Shiro Saigo, the sixth Dan, is considered to be the model of the hero of the novel Sanshiro Sugata. Though small in stature, his fierce performance won him the praise. There were no Yama Arashi to speak of before or after Saigo. In December 1922, Master Kano, mourning the death of Saigo, said in the performance of the techniques he excelled in, none among the several million followers could surpass him. So saying, he honored him by presenting him with the sixth Dan. Yama Arashi is performed by grasping your opponent's collar and sleeve on the same side, lifting him up as in Harai Goshi, then dropping him using the hip. With your right hand placed inside the collar of your opponent, with the thumb inside, push against his right chest. Push your opponent down. Then, just as he tries to raise himself, jump in and throw him. The foot movement is similar to that of Harai Goshi. Your toes should be put close to your opponent's ankle as you brush it upwards. Simultaneously, lift with the right hand while brushing upwards with the right foot, then throw in a large motion upwards. Or Goshi. In Or Goshi, you pull your opponent forward with your arm around his waist, then throw on your waist. Move in with your hip low. Make your throw only after your opponent's hip is sufficiently close. With your left hand, pull your opponent out off balance, forward to your left. Bring his waist sufficiently close to place him on your hips. Then, with both elbows outstretched, pull him straight up to throw. With your left hand under your opponent's side, as you come to grapple, pull his waist close and perform Or Goshi. Here, the opponent's Hanegoshi is turned into Or Goshi. Pull your opponent's waist close as he attacks with a Hanegoshi. Step up close with both your feet and throw using the Or Goshi technique. This is not Utsuri Goshi. Uki Goshi. In Uki Goshi, you draw your opponent's waist in close using one of your arms, then throw using the twisting motion of your waist. In the practice form, the throw is made as your opponent attacks, as if to strike. In Uki Goshi, you throw in a twisting motion after bending back fully, using your left hip as the fulcrum. Your shoulder is placed deep under your opponent's arm, and your arm secures his waist positioned parallel to his belt. Look once again at how you bend your back, how your shoulder should be positioned, and how your waist is twisted. Let's see the difference between an ogoshi and ukigoshi. In ogoshi, keep your knees bent and your waist low. Then straighten the knees and make the throw with an upward pulling movement. In ukigoshi, your waist is only lowered shallowly, and your lower left hip is made the fulcrum as you twist and throw. This is a rare film showing Professor Kano explaining his favorite technique, ukigoshi, before the practice hall of Tokyo Higher Normal School in the early part of the century. Tsurigoshi. In tsurigoshi, you grasp your opponent's belt from behind, then bringing him in close, lift and throw on your hip. You must defend against your opponent's tsurikomigoshi while you grasp his belt from under his arm as you throw. In this form of tsurigoshi, you grasp your opponent's belt over his shoulder. Pulling your opponent forward, you grasp his belt over his shoulder and throw using tsurigoshi. Throwing as you grasp the front part of your opponent's belt is also an application of the tsurigoshi technique. It's called a tsurigoshi only when the belt is grasped in making the throw. Tsurikomigoshi. This is the kata form of tsurikomigoshi. The moment your opponent protects himself by bending backwards, lower your hips and making them the fulcrum of your throw, pull him down with both your arms. In randori, you pull your opponent up with both arms and throw him on your hips when moving either forwards or backwards. Take firm hold of the rear of your opponent's jacket when he's bent forward in a defensive posture to throw, pulling him up. This is also tsurikomigoshi. There is an application of tsurikomigoshi which is generally called sode tsurikomigoshi. By pulling up your opponent's arm, you destroy his balance. You then have a choice of either taking hold of his sleeve opening like this, or taking hold of the elbow section of his sleeve. When grasping the sleeve opening, you sometimes do so by pushing your opponent's hand away. The throw is made when he comes back with the same hand to grasp your jacket. Here's a powerful tsurikomigoshi executed by Habareri of the Soviet Union at the Kano Cup tournament. The Lausanne World Judo Championship lightweight division finals. Nobuyuki Sato wins with a sode tsurikomigoshi. Tsurikomigoshi shown by Nobutoshi Hikage at the All Japan Judo Championship tournament. Koshi Guruma. In Koshi Guruma, you grasp your opponent by the neck and throw in a twisting motion with him on your hips. Control your opponent by holding his neck. Place your waist deep under him and push to the side. Koshi Guruma must be executed by holding your opponent's neck. Harai Goshi. In Harai Goshi, you pull your opponent close and throw with your hip and legs in a sweeping motion. The Nage no Kata form is created by pulling your opponent close by putting a hand under his arm and raising him to destroy his balance. In Randori, you seldom put your hand in as shown here. Here, the technique is performed by following the motion of your opponent who withdraws. Another chance for using Harai Goshi presents itself when you pull your opponent out sideways as shown here. The body movement when executing Harai Goshi varies, as when you crisscross and change the position of your feet. For a moment, your opponent mistakes it for a right-hander technique. Then you turn and go into the motion for Harai Goshi. Let's take a look at various forms of Harai Goshi from tournament films. This is Harai Goshi as performed by Castro of the United States. An All-Japan Judo Championship, Harai Goshi, performed by Nobutoshi Hikage. The throw is made in a winding motion the moment his opponent comes up close and tries to defend himself by swinging his right foot over. Harai Goshi by Yoshimi Masaki at an All-Japan Judo Championship. Hane Goshi. Hane Goshi is a technique of throwing your opponent by bouncing him up using the movement of your hip and foot. Hane Goshi executed in pursuit. It's made the moment your opponent retreats and brings his left foot down. The leg to be used in bouncing your opponent up should be bent a little. You bounce him up around the lower part of his knee. The technique may be used after guiding your opponent sideways. This is Hane Goshi, where you jump in to execute the technique. Pull your opponent downwards, and when he straightens himself up in reaction, jump in to execute this technique. Let's look at the difference between Hane Goshi and Harai Goshi. In hanegoshi, you bounce your opponent up with your leg bent. In haraigoshi, your leg is straight as you bounce your opponent up. Uchimata looks similar to hanegoshi, except you place your leg in between your opponent's legs and bounce him up. Utsurigoshi. Utsurigoshi is a kind of technique used when your opponent attacks with koshiwaza, to raise him up and throw him on your hips. This is an utsurigoshi technique which originates from the opponent's hanegoshi. This is utsurigoshi, which started out as an uchimata by the opponent. You completely raise your opponent up by the waist and opening outwards, throw after moving him over on your hips. It can also be executed after your opponent attacks with an o-sotogari. In this case, you draw your foot a moment before he executes his o-sotogari. The second World Cup tournament. Lesniak of the Soviet Union wins with utsurigoshi. Ushirogoshi. This is the throw to use when your opponent attacks with koshiwaza. You lift your opponent up and throw him down in front of you. This ushirogoshi has developed from the opponent's hanegoshi. Ushirogoshi executed just as your opponent tries to defend himself by curling his feet around yours. When changing into ushirogoshi, your opponent may try defending himself by attacking your foot, as in ouchigari. You then lift up the foot that's been attacked, hoist him up, then throw him down. This is in case your opponent defends himself using something like kouchigari. If your opponent defends himself by using kouchigari from inside, lift your foot that's been attacked, hoist him up, and throw him down. When your opponent attacks with o-sotogari, push his waist up with your leg as you throw him down. Ushirogoshi resulting from your opponent's hanegoshi. You can also execute the technique like this without holding your opponent's hip, but simply lifting it up by using your left foot. These different follow-on techniques are all called ushirogoshi. Dakiage. When on the floor, you grasp your opponent's belt to make him bend over. Then, with your arms crossed, grip both lapels to bring him near. Then, standing up on both legs, raise him up at once deftly to the shoulder level. This technique is dangerous if your opponent is dropped after being raised up, so that the effect of the throw was recognized only in 1926. In those days, an ippon was declared when you succeeded in raising your opponent up to the shoulder high level at one go. But today, the match is suspended with a call of mate. The effect of the technique is not recognized. Hizaguruma. Hizaguruma is a technique of supporting your opponent's knee with your foot as you throw. As your opponent tries to step forward, place the sole of your foot on his knee. Your opponent will turn and fall in a twisting motion. Hizaguruma performed after transferring your right hand from his left lapel to mid-sleeve. Another method, where your opponent's knee is bent. Step forward, execute the technique as if trying to bend your opponent's knee. He then falls in a twisting motion. Hizaguruma, following on from your opponent's kochigari. Raise your attacked foot and follow on with a hizaguruma. This is not kochigaishi, however. Sasae tsurikomiashi. Sasae tsurikomiashi is executed by putting the sole of your foot on your opponent's ankle and throwing with that as the fulcrum. This is when your opponent has stepped forward. This is when you first lightly slap the inside of your opponent's left foot before executing the technique. The aim of this is to destroy your opponent's balance toward the tip of his right foot as you slap his foot from inside. Sasae tsurikomiashi made to look like o-sotogari. When o-sotogari is executed, your opponent defends by moving his weight forward in reaction. Turn your body at that moment, support with your foot as you throw. Sasae tsurikomiashi, executed by Anton Geesink of the Netherlands, the victor of the Tokyo Olympics. Another Sasae tsurikomiashi, as performed by Chonosuke Takagi, the winner of the World Championships in Lausanne. All Japan champion Naoya Ogawa performs Sasae tsurikomiashi. Ogawa grapples his opponent from his left side, brings him in tight using both hands in a characteristically powerful twisting motion. Harai tsurikomiashi. In Harai tsurikomiashi, you can throw your opponent by a sweeping blow to the rear of his foot. Here, the right foot of the opponent is swept away as he tries to retreat, and then he's thrown. You slap at the inside of the foot of your opponent as he tries to retreat to destroy his balance towards the tip of his right foot, then sweep him off his feet. Let's compare these two techniques. In Sasae tsurikomiashi, you support your opponent's foot as you throw. In Harai tsurikomiashi, you slap at your opponent's feet as you make your throw. Sasae and harai are similar in form, but are different in that one has the sasaeru, or supporting motion, whereas the other has the harai ageru, or sweeping motion. Deashi harai. In deashi harai, you sweep away one of your opponent's feet that's moved forward. When your opponent steps forward with his right foot, you open up with your right and sweep using your left foot. Here you sweep the retreating right foot of the opponent who's trying to move back. Here you lead your opponent around and sweep his right foot as he steps forward. This is following on from hizaguruma. When you try hizaguruma, your opponent reciprocates, stepping forward with his right foot. You then sweep away that right foot. In another instance, you release your opponent's hand as he pulls, and using your own hand, bring his foot forward, which you can then sweep away. At the Seoul World Championships, Masaki triumphs over Rashwan with an ippon using deashi harai. An All-Japan Judo Championship. Look at the marvelously well-timed deashi harai performed by Masaki. At the Kano Cup tournament, Hiromitsu Takano executes the deashi harai. Okuriashi harai. Okuriashi harai is a technique where you sweep away both of your opponent's feet as you throw him. You lead your opponent around and sweep away both his feet. In Okuriashi harai, you sweep away both your opponent's feet as they're together. Okuriashi harai performed in 2 steps. You step in and sweep away the retreating foot of your opponent. Let's compare similar techniques. In Okuriashi harai, you sweep away both your opponent's feet together. In deashi harai, you sweep away your opponent's foot as he steps forward. In harai tsurikomiashi, you sweep away your opponent's foot as it retreats towards the far corner. We decide the technique used according to these criteria. Tsubame gaeshi. Tsubame gaeshi is a technique of throwing your opponent by reversing his foot sweep into your own. Shift directly to your right or left. If your opponent attacks with deashi harai or okuriashi harai, you dodge it and turn it into tsubame gaeshi. Even when moving back, you can also do likewise. Kosotogari. Changing your opponent's taiotoshi into Kosotogari. Dodging your opponent's taiotoshi, make him off balance, standing on both his heels. Then cut him down in the direction of his toes using the back of your feet. Your foot will be placed on roughly the same line as your opponent's. When you're clipping, you should do so from your opponent's heels in the direction of his toes, as if rubbing the surface of the mat. Your opponent should fall suddenly on the spot. Kosotogari, performed by Shozo Fuji, a former middleweight class world champion. He catches his opponent with Kosotogari just as he comes back from applying a right side Osotogari. Kosotogake. Kosotogake is a technique of throwing your opponent in a kind of pulling up motion. Sometimes the sole of the foot, at other times the leg is used for clipping. As the opponent withdraws his left foot, shifting his weight onto his other foot, you make him fall, hooking with your leg. You first try an uchimata. Then the moment your opponent tries to defend himself, leaning backward, you turn it into Kosotogake. Here you take hold of the rear collar to bring your opponent in close, push him back to go off balance, then hook and make him fall. Now let's see the differences between similar techniques. In Kosotogari, you step in close to the side of your opponent, make him lose balance on his heel and clip him down. In Deashi Harai, the moment your opponent's foot is about to touch the mat, or when his foot is about to be lifted off the mat, you sweep his foot away to make him fall. In Kosotogake, you make your opponent lose his balance by making him stand on his heels as you face him directly. Clip as if to pull your opponent up and backwards as you throw him. World champion Naoya Ogawa shows off Kosotogake, which is his favorite technique. This is a two-stage Kosotogake performed by Yoshimi Masaki. Marshal of the USA executes Kosotogake, having secured the rear collar and pulled his opponent in close. Osotogari. Pull the right leg of your opponent out, then clip him down the moment it touches the mat. Pull his left leg out and cut down on his right leg. Osotogari from a harai tsurikomiashi. As your opponent advances to defend himself, cut down on his right leg. Another method is to put your arm under your opponent's and holding his waist from the rear to cut him down. Another is to pull your opponent up by the front of his belt and execute a clip upwards. Here you push your opponent's elbow to make him lose balance, and cut him down to the rear. An All-Japan Judo Championship. Yasuhiro Yamashita executes a convincing Osotogari. Again, at an All-Japan Judo Championship, Osotogari, following on from a Harai Goshi, performed by Hiromi Masaki. The 1987 World Judo Championships. Hirotaka Okada performs a magnificent Osotogari. Osoto Otoshi. Osoto Otoshi is made by pushing down your opponent by sliding your leg down his rear waist. In Osoto Otoshi, your opponent's foot must be on the matting as you make the sliding clip. Here you see Osoto Otoshi made with the opponent's neck on your arm. Let's look at the differences between Osotogari and Osoto Otoshi. If your opponent's foot goes up in the air, it's Osotogari. If your opponent's leg remains on the matting as you sweep and he goes down, it's an Osoto Otoshi. At the World Judo Championships, Hitoshi Saito makes Osoto Otoshi. Osoto Guruma. In Osoto Guruma, you begin your throw as in Osotogari, but cut both your opponent's legs as you twist him down. Sometimes it's done in two movements. In a variation of this, you step behind both your opponent's legs with your right leg and make him fall, as in Tai Otoshi. Osoto Gaeshi. As your opponent steps in trying to execute Osotogari, you instead cut him down at that moment using the same throw. Here, the opponent's Osotogari is returned after a short delay. As you defend yourself against your opponent's Osotogari by pulling back your right foot, you counter with an Osotogari. As you defend yourself against your opponent's Osotogari by pulling back your left foot, you counter with a twist. As you defend against your opponent's Osotogari by pulling back your left foot, you counter as if in Osoto Gaeshi. Another example where an opportunity to counter came still later. Oguruma. Oguruma is a technique where you make your throw by turning your opponent around your leg as an axis. Placing your leg near the lower abdomen of your opponent to use as an axis, you turn him around and throw. Execute Hizaguruma, and the moment your opponent counters with his right foot, follow on with a Oguruma. Oguruma was one of the favorite techniques of the 10th Dan, Kyuzo Mifune. He's captured the moment his opponent tries to step forward on his right foot. Ashiguruma. In Ashiguruma, you place your foot on your opponent's knee and throw with that as an axis. It's the same principle as Hizaguruma. Here, an Osotogari is followed by Ashiguruma. First, you execute Osotogari. When your opponent responds by withdrawing his left foot, you follow with Ashiguruma. Let's see the difference between Osotogari and Ashiguruma. When you use Osotogari, your opponent falls directly to the rear. With Ashiguruma, your opponent twists and falls forward. The name of the technique is decided by looking closely at these points. Yamashita wins with Ashiguruma at the 1955 All Japan Judo Championships. Uchimata. In using the Uchimata technique, you first pull your opponent forward. Then just when his weight shifts to his left foot as he moves forward, you throw by sweeping up from between his legs. Here you jump in to make your throw the moment your opponent withdraws his foot and touches the mat. Pull your opponent forward to make him assume jigotai, or a self-defense position. Then jump in and apply Uchimata just as he raises himself. This is a method generally known as Ken-Ken Uchimata. You sweep with your left leg to destroy your opponent's balance and throw. And Uchimata after having switched feet. The movement is similar to that of Harai Goshi and Oguruma. The method used is to pull your opponent sideways, then sweep up on the leg he steps out on. First, you make a move, as in performing Ouchigari. Then it's transformed into Uchimata. In this situation, the objective is to cause your opponent to open up his legs and lean forward off balance. If your opponent defends himself by going down on one knee, he's still judged to be standing, and the uchimata is recognized. Uchimata, performed by Seiki Nosei of Japan. Pesniak of the USSR follows an opponent in to perform an uchimata. Uchimata performed by Olympic champion Yamashita. Another Olympic champion, Hitoshi Saito, performs a variation uchimata. When his opponent counters by taking hold of Saito's knee with his right hand, Saito, turning left, transforms the movement into an uchimata. An uchimata by Sumio Endo, where he makes use of the twisting of his body. Uchimata Gaishi. In Uchimata Gaishi, when your opponent attacks with uchimata, you counter by cutting back on his pivotal foot. Or uchigari. Pull your opponent's foot forward, then just as he tries to put his weight on that foot, clip his foot and make him fall. Here, the opponent's foot is being clipped as he tries to retreat. Here, the opponent is pulled out sideways, then his foot is clipped as if to open it further out. Here, the opponent is pulled in close, then clipped the moment he tries to rise up. Here, when the opponent tries to get away by raising his foot, he's pushed forward and cut down off balance. Here, his leg is grabbed as you clip. In the World Championships, Vachon of France performs an ouchigari. Ouchigari performed by Yamashita. At the finals of the second Kano Cup tournament, Katsuhiko Kashiwazaki performs an ouchigari, taking hold of his opponent's foot. ouchigaeshi. Ouchigaeshi is a technique of countering your opponent's ouchigari with an ouchigari of your own. There are two ways of countering. One is to clip the foot that's clipping you, and the other is to clip your opponent's pivotal foot. Here, the opponent's foot is clipped back as he tries to clip you. Here, you counter by clipping both your opponent's attacking foot as well as his pivotal foot at the same time. Dodge your opponent's ouchigari and counter with a twisting motion. This is also ouchigaeshi. Use your opponent's force to return the attack by twisting to the right. First dodging your opponent's ouchigari, then throwing and twisting to your left. Hisao Matsui performs an ouchigari. Pressure of West Germany performs an ouchigaeshi as they rise from the newaza position. Ouchigari. In Kouchigari, you pull your opponent's foot forward, then you clip just as his foot comes down on the mat. In this instance, you cut down on the retreating foot of your opponent. Here, Kouchigari is performed by pulling the opponent off sideways, and here you cause your opponent to open his feet wide and clip after subduing his defense. Another method is to clip holding one of your opponent's feet. You may sometimes turn around once as you take hold of your opponent's foot and make him fall. Bergmans of Belgium performs Kouchigari from an uchimata position. Hitoshi Saito at the 1988 All-Japan Weight Class Championships. He performs Kouchigari, taking hold of his opponent's leg. Hanegoshigaeshi. There are two ways of performing Hanegoshigaeshi. One is a leg technique whereby you reap the pivotal foot of your opponent, and another is a hip technique of pushing up with the hip and twisting before countering. At times you hold the opponent's waist and reap your opponent's pivotal foot. With your hip, you bounce your opponent up in a large motion, then throw, twisting with both hands. When bouncing your opponent with your hip, you may at times simultaneously sweep upwards using your leg. Harai Goshigaeshi. In Harai Goshigaeshi, You counter by reaping your opponent's pivotal foot for executing harai goshi. Just as your opponent attacks with harai goshi, you counter by extending your hips, then reap his pivotal foot to make him fall. The technique you use in countering, holding your opponent's hips, is also harai goshi gaeshi. Here the opponent's hips are being held, but as the counter action is reaping his pivotal foot, it's not ushiro goshi. Ushiro goshi is a technique where you raise your opponent up, holding him by the hip and letting him fall. Tomoe nage. In tomoe nage, you drop backwards while putting a foot on your opponent's lower abdomen and throw him back over your head. Here, the technique is applied just as soon as your opponent steps forward and tries to put his weight on his foot.